What happened to the woman who gave back what the goddess demanded? Chisom returned the child to Allah's shrine with empty arms and a broken heart. She thought the debt was paid. She thought the nightmare was over. She was wrong. The earth does not forget. And when Allah accepts a sacrifice, she completes the transaction. But what Chisom didn't know was that returning Adanna was only half of the covenant. The other half would require something she never expected to give. The truth about what her husband's family had really stolen from the goddess. Before we continue, drop a comment right now. Have you watched part 1? And if you're new here, welcome. Please like, share, comment, and hit that subscribe button. You're about to witness what happens when the earth decides to balance her scales. Chisom returned to the compound just as the first light broke over the Iroko trees. Her wrapper was stained with red laterite dust. Her feet were bleeding from the forest path. Her arms were empty. Ugochukwu was waiting at the compound gate. He did not ask where she had been. He saw her face, the terrible peace that had settled there, and he knew. Madame Joy emerged from her room like smoke, her eyes moving from Chisom's face to her empty arms and back again. For once, the older woman said nothing, but her silence was not mercy. It was the silence of someone mentally sharpening a blade. The village noticed immediately. In a place where every compound's business is known before the yam porridge grows cold, the disappearance of a baby does not go unquestioned. Where is the child? What happened to Adanna? Did she die? Was she truly yours? The questions came like rain during Harmattan season. Unexpected, relentless, cutting. Chisom answered none of them. She moved through the compound like a woman walking underwater, performing her duties mechanically, fetching water, preparing meals, sweeping the same red earth that had taken everything from her. But on the third night after Adanna's return to the shrine, something happened that no one in the village could ignore. The river stopped flowing. The Anambra River, which had run through that village for longer than any elder could remember, which had never gone dry even in the worst droughts, simply stopped. The water sat perfectly still, like a mirror made of glass, reflecting the sky, without movement, without sound. The fishermen who went to check their nets in the morning found them suspended in water that would not ripple when touched. Children threw stones that landed with no splash. The river had become something else, entirely not dry, not flowing, but frozen in a moment between states, waiting. Papa Obiora, the Dibia, was summoned by the Council of Elders. He went to the river bank with his divination tools, and what he saw in the cowrie shells made his hands shake. He called for an emergency gathering in the Ilo, the village square. Every compound was required to send representatives. This was not a request. When the village assembled, Papa Obiora stood in the center of the circle, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. Allah has stopped the river because the debt is not finished. A child was returned, yes, but the original offense, the sacred land that was cleared, the covenant that was broken, this has not been addressed. The earth goddess will not release the water until the Okonkwo family makes proper restitution for what Ugochukwu's grandfather stole. Every eye in the village turned to Ugochukwu. Chisom watched her husband's face change as the weight of ancestral sin settled on his shoulders. This was not his crime, but it was his inheritance. In this village, in this cosmology, the deaths of the dead do not die with them. They wait, patient as roots, until the earth decides to call them due. That night, Ugochukwu came to Chisom. He sat across from her, the same position, the same dim light, the third conversation that would change everything. Tell me again, he said quietly. Exactly what you saw at the shrine the night you found Adanna. So Chisom told him,
What cloth?
the
Show
white
me.
cloth, the red clay
Sure, this is
markings,
dangerous.
the fresh leaves, and then, because she had nothing left to lose, she told him about the small carved token she had found beneath the cloth, the one she had hidden in her wrapper and never shown anyone. She retrieved it from the bottom of her wooden box and placed it in his hands. Ugochukwu stared at the Ikenga token, at the family lineage pattern carved into the wood, and something broke in him that had been holding together for too long. My grandfather,
Papa Obiora
he
told me stories when
whispered.
I was young about land.
Papa Obiora told me stories when I was young about land he cleared at the forest edge, about how the crops there grew taller than anywhere else, but how he died suddenly before the harvest, how my father always refused to farm that plot, how it was left wild again. Chisom nodded slowly. The goddess placed Adana at the shrine as collateral. Not randomly. She placed her on your family's death marker. She was waiting for someone from your bloodline to come claim what looked like a gift, but was actually a test. Ugochukwu finished. And when you took her, I tied your family's death to my own desperation. I made it worse. The ritual of restitution took 7 days to prepare. Papa Obiora consulted with Dibayas from 3 neighboring villages to ensure the rites were performed correctly. Allah was not a goddess who accepted approximations. The Okonkwo family was required to provide 7 white goats, unblemished, 7 clay pots of palm wine, fermented for a full moon cycle, kola nut from trees that had never been harvested before, white cloth woven by hands that had never taken payment, and the presence of every living Okonkwo descendant willing to accept the weight of ancestral debt as their own. On the 7th day, at dawn, the entire family processed to the forest edge, to the plot of land that Ugochukwu's grandfather had cleared decades ago, land that had returned to wild, but still carried the mark of violation. Chisom walked with them, though she was not blood. Ugochukwu held her hand. Madam Joy walked 3 paces behind, her face unreadable. At the boundary of the sacred land, Papa Obiora began the ritual. He poured libations. He spoke the prayers in the old dialect, the one that existed before English, before even Igbo had fully formed, the language that the earth herself still understood. He called out the name of Ugochukwu's grandfather. He named the offense. He offered the restitution. And then, he did something unexpected. He turned to Chisom. Chisom Adaize Okonkwo, Papa Obiora said, his voice formal, ritual-bound. You took a child that was not yours from a shrine you did not understand, but you also did what few have the strength to do. You returned what you loved more than your own life. You gave back what you had stolen, not because you were forced, but because you understood finally what the earth required. He paused, letting the words settle. Allah recognizes the difference between those who take and those who, when shown the truth, release. You are not the debtor here. You are the one who paid what others refused to pay. Honesty, sacrifice, humility. From his bag, Papa Obiora removed something wrapped in banana leaves. He unwrapped it carefully. It was a small carved figure. Not Allah this time, but Chi, the personal God, the spirit of destiny that accompanies every soul from birth. The goddess sends this message, Papa Obiora said, looking directly at Chisom. Your arms were empty because you were grasping. Your womb was closed because you were demanding. But now that you have opened your hands, now that you have learned to receive rather than take, she asks you this question directly. Are you ready to be a mother, not because you need to be one, but because a child needs you? Chisom's breath caught. I don't understand, she whispered. Papa Obiora smiled, and it was the first time Chisom had seen him smile in months. There is a child, he said slowly, in the next village, orphaned 3 weeks ago when her mother died and her father's family refused her. She is 4 years old. She needs a home. She needs a mother who will love her, not as proof of fertility, not as a cure for shame, but as herself, a living child, not a spirit, not a test, just a child. Allah does not give what we demand, but she offers what we are finally ready to hold. The river began to flow again that afternoon. Slowly at first, a trickle, a whisper, a return of sound to a silence that had become unbearable. By evening, it ran full and clear, as if it had never stopped. The restitution was complete. The land was blessed. The debt was paid. And 3 days later, Chisom and Ugochukwu traveled to the neighboring village of Nokupa and met a small girl named Chiamaka. God is beautiful. She was thin, quiet, with eyes that had already seen too much loss. When Chisom knelt before her and offered her hand, Chiamaka stared at it for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. Her hand was warm, solid, real, not bait, not a test, not collateral, just a child who needed a mother, and a mother who had finally learned how to love without grasping. 6 months later, the Okonkwo compound had changed in ways that could not be measured. Chiamaka's laughter rang through the courtyard, genuine, unguarded, the sound of a child who was beginning to believe she was safe. She called Chisom Mama now, tentatively at first, then with increasing confidence. Ugochukwu watched his wife with something close to wonder, seeing in her a strength he had never recognized when he thought her only weakness was her barrenness. Even Madame Joy had softened, though she would never admit it. She was seen, more than once, braiding Chiamaka's hair with a gentleness her hands had forgotten they possessed. But the most significant change was in Chisom herself. She moved differently now, not with the frantic energy of a woman trying to prove her worth, but with the steady, grounded presence of someone who had walked into the dark and come back with her hands open. She no longer prayed for a child. She prayed thanksgiving for the child she had been trusted with. One evening, as the sun set over the Iroko trees, Chisom walked back to the shrine of Allah. Not in secret this time, not in desperation. In gratitude, she brought kola nut, palm wine, white cloth. She performed the Oji rite properly this time, with a heart that was neither grasping nor grieving, but simply present. As she prayed, she felt it a warmth in the air, a shift in the quality of silence, the sense of being seen by something vast and ancient, and not unkind. And then, in the red laterite clay, before the shrine, a small impression appeared. Not a footprint, not a symbol. A handprint, tiny, infant-sized. Chisom stared at it, her throat tight. She did not know if it was Adana's. She did not know if Adana had ever been fully human or if she had been spirit from the beginning, a divine instrument wearing the shape of what Chisom most desired. She would never know, but as she knelt there, she understood something she had not understood before. Adana had not been taken from her as punishment. Adana had been sent through her as transformation. The baby at the shrine had been bait, yes, but not to trap her, to break her open, to teach her the difference between taking and receiving, between demanding and trusting, between loving something because you need it and loving something because it needs you. Chisom rose from the shrine and walked back through the forest path, the same red laterite road she had walked so many times before. But this time, she was not empty. She carried something more valuable than a child plucked from sacred ground. She carried wisdom, the kind that only comes from losing what you thought you needed and discovering what you actually required. When she reached the compound, Chiamaka was waiting at the gate, hopping from foot to foot with the impatient energy of a child who has something important to say. Mama! Mama! Papa said I can help you cook tomorrow. He said I'm big enough now. Chisom knelt and pulled Chiamaka into her arms. These arms that had once been empty, that had once held a spirit child who was never meant to stay, that now held a living, breathing, real daughter who had chosen her just as much as she had chosen Chiamaka. Yes, my love, Chisom whispered into her daughter's hair. You are big enough. You have always been enough. And in that moment, surrounded by the sounds of the compound settling into evening, the distant laughter of neighbors, the smell of cooking fires, the feel of her daughter's heart beating against her chest, Chisom understood the final lesson the earth goddess had taught her. A mother is not defined by what she births. She is defined by what she nurtures. The earth does not punish the desperate. She breaks them open so they can finally grow. If this story moved you, we need to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us, what would you have done in Chisom's position? Would you have returned the child? This is not just a story about one woman. It's about every person who has ever confused what they want with what they need. About learning to open your hands instead of clench them. About discovering that sometimes the blessing doesn't look like what you prayed for, but it's exactly what you required. Like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this. Subscribe because part 3 is coming. And you won't believe what happens when Chiamaka discovers the truth about the sister she never knew she had. Thank you for watching. Until next time, may you walk with open hands and a willing heart.